Paula Claire, CLAIR. Clean air is essential to health and well-being for human, animal, and plant life. Compressor stations, pigging stations, metering and regulating stations associated with gas pipelines are polluters. Our air is under assault by the AIM project. Spectra Energy has known cancer-causing PCBs in its pipelines. As per Spectra reports to FERC, it is under federal scrutiny for PCBs. It has more than 50 but less than 500 pounds per million PCBs in its pipelines, which also carry Marcellus gas from Pennsylvania, known to have high levels of radon. Radon degrades into solids of radioactive lead and radioactive polonium in the pipeline. Pipelines are cleaned by instruments launched through the pipeline called pigs, which deliver this carcinogenic radioactive debris to pigging stations for disposal. One is in Stony Point, and others are planned for Somers and Buchanan. It is unconscionable to permit a radioactive site in a residential area. Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam are densely populated areas. There is no safe place for pigging stations here. It is further unconscionable to vent such materials into the air anywhere in our state, but especially in a residential area. A Spectra Energy representative admitted in a local town board meeting that venting of these materials into the air is one of their practices. AIM compressor stations, already considered major sources of pollution, should not be allowed to expand just because they have emission credits that cover their expansion. Spectra reports say that netting will be applied to offset emissions over thresholds. Large amounts of toxins, regardless of netting and offsets implied, will adversely affect health in our area. The airshed for offsets runs from Maine to Virginia. Regardless of whether the overall airshed is unaffected, the immediate area will be affected. Since Stony Point and Southeast compressor stations are only 26 miles apart, cumulative emissions may also apply in this region. Spectra has equipment exempted by law. This indicates that there will be even more emissions than reported adversely affecting air in our region. Increased ozone from the cumulative VOCs and NOx adversely affects crop growth, which is counterproductive to Governor Cuomo's recently announced initiative to preserve farming here in the Hudson Valley. The 70.6 tons per year of volatile organic compounds in the Southeast and 72.6 tons per year of that in Stony Point also include carcinogenic materials such as benzene and other materials anticipated to be human carcinogens. Nitrogen oxide at 132 tons per year in Southeast and 89 tons per year in Stony Point is also linked to serious respiratory problems, including damage to lung tissue and lung function. In conclusion, I am calling upon New York State to reject this permit. Thank you.
Good evening. I have two pieces that I'd like to submit eventually. One is I'm reading a letter from someone who was unable to attend tonight, who's lived with the compressor station.
You can use your time as you see fit.
Thank you.
At the end of 3 minutes.
Okay. All right. I'm reading this letter for Mary Kushner, who is from Roseland, New Jersey. She said, I want to share my experiences as when a natural gas compressor station was built in our town nearly 2 years ago. Roseland, New Jersey is a residential suburban community of somewhat under 6,000 residents in western Essex County. For about 40 years, there was a natural gas pipeline which ran under the town, and there was a measuring and metering station which was part of the pipeline system. Most of us knew nothing about these. About 2 years ago, without providing the required notice to nearby stakeholders, Transco Williams received FERC permits and began building a new natural gas compressor station in our town. The site of the compressor station was between Essex County Environmental Center to the west and a large public service electric gas company, the local utility company, high voltage electric switching station on the east. Nothing more than wire fencing and a few trees that were not removed to construct the compressor station separates the compressor station from these neighbors. Essex County Environmental Center is on 1,360 acres of wetland preserve, which remains almost entirely undeveloped. It stretches along 6 miles of the Passaic River. It offers fishing, boating, birding opportunities, greenhouses, gardens, etc. It is a well-used facility for children and adults. The irony of placing a gas compressor station next to this idyllic facility need not be pointed out. The PSE&G high voltage switching station has been in the process of being upgraded as it receives power from one operating power line, which is having its capacity increased, and from a new Susquehanna-Roseland project, which will be bringing 500,000 volts. This upgraded station is located less than 800 feet from the compressor station. The danger of placing this high voltage electrical station so close to a natural gas facility presents major safety and national security concerns. During the construction of the station, there was planned blowdown, a venting of natural gas, which was not announced to the community. The local elementary school is about 1 mile down from the station. The strong smell of natural gas entered the school's ventilating system, sickening many children and adults and creating great fear. The ventilating system was shut down and the school was evacuated. Needless to say, students were frightened and parents were both terrified and infuriated. Several employees from nearby office buildings went homesick as well. We feel the compressor station presents ongoing health, environmental, and safety risks that should never have been constructed in this location. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bell. Well timed. Ellen Cantor.
So I'm Ellen Cantaro, C-A-N for Nora, T for Tom, A-R-O-W. I come from Boston, but I'm a journalist, and I've been writing for the past 4 years about the effects of fracking in all of its manifestations, from drilling through pipelines on local communities. There are 350,000 miles of gas transmission pipelines in the United States. There are 2 million miles of gas distribution pipelines in the United States. According to the National Pipeline Safety Administration, this system, which resembles a cracked windshield because there's so many pipelines, is leaking throughout its complex. And over a course of 20 years, it would be impossible to repair these leaks. Although I will say that there would be plenty of jobs for you folks out there if the country would set itself to repairing the many leaks in existing pipelines. The reason that I'm posit this 20-year figure is that methane, the gas that is leaking from these pipelines, has a global warming power that is 86 times greater than that of CO2. If you cut from the leaks in the pipelines to leaks at wellheads, along well bores, and through the rock that lies above the horizontal drill bores. According to Louis Allstadt, who is a former vice president of ExxonMobil, this part of the fracking infrastructure also leaks. So you have leaks coming up along the wellbores, leaks coming up through the rock, leaks coming out of the pipelines, adding to a monumental burden of methane on the climate. 250 million years ago, 95% of all life on the planet died. It was called the Great Dying, or the Great Permian Extinction. We are now experiencing the beginning of a similar extinction. Dozens of species are disappearing from the planet every day. Approving this project will only add to that global problem.
My last name is V-A-N, capital D-O-L-S-E-N. I just this afternoon attended energy meeting with presented by John Rhodes, who is the chairman of NYSERDA, and he talked about the REV, which is reinventing the energy vision, this great program and the New York Prize. This is the same government that these DEC workers work under Governor Cuomo. So we're meeting, hearing about all these initiatives for moving toward more renewable energy, locally distributed power, lots of jobs, and all kinds of positive things coming through from our New York State government. At the same moment, a few hours later, I'm here. It's the weirdest feeling. Why are we thinking of approving another fossil fuel infrastructure project? It doesn't make sense. So that is really my statement. The other piece that I had prepared to say was, which has been said before, is that Governor Cuomo and Commissioner Zucker of the Department of Health and Commissioner Martens, the head of your agency, all agreed that horizontal hydraulic fracturing is a health risk, is not acceptable for New York State. So why would we even think about having the fracked gas expanded more, larger, with larger emissions right here in Stony Point? I really don't understand it. Thank
Weinger?
Good evening. My name is Ellen Weinger. I am the director
Could you spell your name?
of Weininger. I am the director of educational outreach at Grassroots Environmental Education, a science-based environmental health nonprofit working directly with scientists and medical experts. And I was at that same seminar and wondering about the same thing, why we're sitting here trying to promote a dinosaur from the 20th century when we are looking at local distributed systems that are resilient and create energy independence and security. Grassroots strongly urges the DEC to reject the AIM project's air and water permits that will allow it to continue to pollute our drinking water and contaminate our soil and our air supply. Radioactive materials throughout the AIM project, construction, operations, and distributions poses enormous public health and environmental threat. It's well documented in the scientific literature. Gas being transported through the pipeline is laced with gaseous radon, and decay products accumulate along the interior pipes. By its own admission, the industry's own publication makes statements about the accumulation of the pipeline scrapings that contain lead-210 and polonium-210 as well. In addition to radon decay products, PCBs, black powder, anaerobic microbials also accumulate in the pipeline and infrastructure and pigging stations, which have been alluded to earlier, where pipes are inspected, cleaned, and in condensate tanks at compressor and metering and regulating stations, as well as in venting operations throughout the pipeline. The radioactive material can be inhaled when these contaminants are dislodged by mechanical means in these pigging operations. During these activities, pigging equipment becomes contaminated and can contaminate surrounding property. Stormwater runoff containing radioactive materials can migrate to nearby property and waterways, potentially contaminating soil and water supplies. Radioactive contaminants can also be inhaled when they become airborne through dust particles. And radioactive contaminants do not dissipate, they continue to spread further. Radon is the leading cause of lung cancer in non-smokers. There's no safe level of exposure. It's a neurological poison, and low levels of lead are linked with cognitive deficits in children and increased blood pressure in adults. Low lead levels of exposure are an important risk factor for renal failure and have been linked with low birth weight. It is classified as a probable human carcinogen, while polonium, another decay product, is a radioactive carcinogen. Thank you.
Gail Bishop.
It's really hard to hear in the back of the room when there's people talking. Can we please
Folks,
ask
if there are conversations happening in the back of the room, please take them outside. What you've done, free to come back into the venue.
Okay, my name is Gail Pisha, P-I-S-H-A, and I've lived in Rockland County my entire life. I'm speaking for Sierra Club's Lower Hudson Group, which has 4,000 members in Rockland, Westchester, and Putnam counties who would be impacted by the AIM pipeline expansion. I'd like to ask the DEC to think about what's wrong with the following story. The story begins with a company that wants to drastically expand a natural gas pipeline, but the people who live along the route oppose it because they're afraid of the health and safety impacts of the project. Meanwhile, Governor Cuomo and Commissioner Zucker decide to ban hydraulic fracturing in New York because of the health risks it would pose to New Yorkers, including exposure to radioactive and other toxic emissions. As we've heard, methane is also a potent greenhouse gas and will contribute to climate change. So far, so good. But at the same time, FERC wants the DEC to issue air permits so the Stony Point and Southeast compressor stations can be dramatically expanded along with the pipeline. You've heard from others tonight about the dangers of the emissions that will leak and be expelled from the compressor stations during the blowdowns. The tri-state area does not meet federal air quality standards right now, according to the EPA. FERC has not assessed the health impacts of this proposal, nor the cumulative health impacts of multiple projects in the area. These include emissions from all the infrastructure, the compressor stations, the pipeline, and the metering stations, plus a massive waste-to-energy plant also proposed for Stony Point, which would result in air pollution from its 7 smokestacks and about 250 trucks per day. The DEC could be the hero in this story, though, by refusing to issue air permits without an independent health assessment and independent baseline air testing in the impacted areas. The Rockland, Westchester, and Putnam County legislatures have passed resolutions asking for these assessments to protect their residents. We're entitled to the same health review for gas infrastructure as for fracking. The only way this story can have a happy ending is if the DEC further assesses the cumulative impacts of all the emissions in the area before deciding whether to grant Title V air permits. Only then might the local residents live happily ever after. Thank you.
My name is Eric Klinenberg, Lindberg. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. The DEC should reject the Title V air permits to expand the Southeast and Stony Point compressor stations and take further action to oppose the Algonquin Incremental Market Project and the forthcoming Atlantic Bridge Project, which share many of the same components and infrastructure. I live in Peekskill, just 500 feet from the 2 existing Algonquin pipelines and about 1,000 feet from the Peekskill Metering and Regulating Station on Albany Post Road. I also do business near the Somers Metering Station on Route 6. And although the emissions from M&R stations are not well studied, I can tell you from personal experience, as can many people, that these areas frequently smell strongly of gas for prolonged periods of time. We know that compressor stations, metering stations, and other infrastructure release thousands of tons of toxins annually, both through fugitive emissions and scheduled and accidental blowdowns. Residents are not notified when these events occur, nor are they informed of the potential cumulative effects of exposure. Blowdowns, we know, include methane and particles of radioactive polonium and lead. This is happening to us right now, every day in our neighborhoods. It is a known public health hazard. It does not matter how well it's built. It does not matter how safe the pipeline is. They emit gas in our neighborhoods. That is why that's one of the reasons that Westchester, Rockland, and Putnam are already non-attainment areas in certain areas of air quality, according to the EPA. We do not meet federal air quality standings right now. FERC's environmental impact statement projects that annual emissions from the compressors and the metering stations will increase slightly. But these numbers are not reliable as the station designs have not even been completed yet. We don't know what they're going to do. And while it looks good on paper to consider the annual emissions, there's been no independent study of what happens to a person in the area of a blowdown event and how those singular events affect personal and public health, particularly over prolonged periods of time. There's no continuous monitoring of air quality in these neighborhoods, no baseline air quality assessments at these sites. And even more critically, each of these components has only received a cursory review as separate emitters. No study has examined the cumulative effects or health impacts of having so many pieces of pollutant-emitting infrastructure in close proximity. That is the heart of environmental justice. Further, by breaking up this large system expansion into separate projects, AIM, Atlantic Bridge, and Access Northeast, it further serves to dilute the validity of the data and erode public trust. I urge you not to approve this application and to vocally and publicly oppose the project until our concerns are met. You do not need to have an ideology or a cause to see that this is a raw deal for anyone nearby the pipeline, and we should work to prevent it from going through. Thank you.
I'm sorry, Ross. My mistake. Ross Pepe, P-E-P.
Good evening. I am Ross Pepe, P-E-P-E, President of Construction Industry Council of Westchester and Hudson Valley, and the Building Contractors Association of Mid-Hudson. Together, these organizations represent more than 500 firms involved in virtually every aspect of public work, commercial and private construction in the Hudson Valley region. For nearly 60 years, I have lived and worked in both Rockland and Westchester counties. Our association's members and their many employees support the AIM project because the region's aging energy infrastructure needs to be updated, and this project will create construction jobs, increase the tax base for cash-strapped localities, and provide cost-effective energy for the region. The AIM project will put people to work in the Hudson Valley. The men and women you see here tonight, from the local laborers, operating engineers, and Teamsters, truly do have their jobs on the line. This is their economic pipeline to their paychecks and futures. Just like all of us who live in the region, we also want to make sure the pipeline is constructed safely and operates with minimal environmental impacts. I have worked closely with the regulators at the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency for many years. They are consummate professionals who will ensure the AIM project's design, permits, construction, and ongoing operations are all well in compliance with their agency's standards and regulations. In order for the AIM project permits to be approved, the regulatory agencies will confirm the project does not cause or contribute to any violation of national ambient air quality standards, nor interfere with our state's plan to bring an area in attainment of the NAAQS. Additionally, Algonquin must maintain and comply with its Title V air permits that include all requirements of the New York State Implementation Plan, New Source Performance Standards, and Section 112 Air Toxic Standards. These standards also require that Algonquin file an annual emissions inventory, an annual compliance certificate, and semi-annual periodic monitoring reports. All reports for the Southeast and Stony Point compressor stations are filed with the New York State DEC and are available to the public. I am impressed by the thoroughness of the questions posed by many in our region through FERC's DEIS process. I am equally impressed with Algonquin's in-depth responses to our questions on the pipeline's impact on the environment, the pipeline safety protocols and safety features, and the proposed route and rights-of-way impacts. Public input remains a priority and has very much shaped the project route and design as much as the project alignment and engineering allows. The Construction Industry Council urges FERC and DEC approval.
Thank you, sir.
Good evening. My name is George Patanovic. It's spelled P-O-T-A-N-O-V-I-C. I'm the president of the Stony Point Action Committee for the Environment Space, and I'm a resident of the town of Stony Point. I first want to say that I thank the DEC for holding this meeting in Stony Point, and I'm glad to see there's such a great turnout from the public, both the members of the union as well as the interested public. This is an important part of a process to have public input, so I appreciate your all being here and putting the thought into the process. The supervisor of town of Stony Point spoke earlier about the benefits of Algonquin gas, and basically they've been a good neighbor in Stony Point. They do provide jobs, they do provide taxes, and I know the union's interested in jobs. I'm glad they're using local workers. But I do have some concerns about the project's impact or potential impact on Stony Point residents, particularly regarding drainage during construction, the impact on properties that are adjoining the easement, The 42-inch pipeline is quite a large expansion of this project. It has the potential of adding some significant drainage problems on what is already a very steep terrain. So I'm concerned about that, and this ought to be really closely monitored. Also, the air quality monitoring is another important part of this. It's been raised, many of these issues have been raised before. We do need to have an independent review of air monitoring quality. And while the information may be available on a DEC website, it has to be made available to the public so that the public will know what the monitoring is. Continued monitoring, it should be as transparent as possible. The Rockland County Legislature did pass a resolution regarding this, and I support that resolution. We need to have some baseline testing and monitoring as during the project as well. Concern about emissions of air pollutants is dramatically underestimated, and it also does not address the cumulative impact of air quality. Those are other areas of concern. Regarding home rule, Stony Point actually has a very good blasting law that we developed back in the early 90s. And I know that this project falls under federal regulations, which I believe is much more limited than the extent to which we have as a blasting law in town. I think it's only a 50-foot easement or something regarding the distance from the actual blasting. So if blasting is going to be done, what I'm concerned about is that many people in Stony Point have wells and septics, and that this project could have an adverse effect on homeowners that live along the easement. And I think this ought to be taken into consideration. This is a terrain here that's very rocky, as was brought out before, and also any kind of blasting done could have a tremendous effect. For instance, the Stony Point blasting law requires that a survey be done for any house that's within a 500-foot radius. Noise and this humming that I believe could be a concern and has been a concern in areas in Connecticut where this line exists is also a concern. I know I'm limited. Space will be supplying some written comments as well, so I really appreciate your being here this evening, and thank you for listening.
Stetson Turpek.
Hello, my name is Stetson Turpek. I'm a member of Local 754 Laborers Union.
Mr. Turpek, would you spell that?
Yes, sir. Terpak. I've been with the local 7 years now. Since I've been with the local, I've pretty much done nothing but gas work. I've traveled extensively on pipelines in Illinois, Pennsylvania, Louisiana. I started in New York on a pipeline. Majority of the pipelines have a higher standard of safety for the general public, for homeowners, for everybody they work around. The DEC, environmental, they hold a higher standard to pipeline. They understand that they don't want to disturb any natural wetlands or disturb anything that wells or water. They just hold them to a higher standard. This isn't the first pipeline put in, and it's not going to be the last. Sorry, a little nervous. But yeah, that's about all I have. But I thank you for your time, and have a good evening.
Alicia Malloy.
My name is Alicia Malloy, and I'm here representing the Federated Conservationists of Westchester County. FCWC is a 501c3 environmental and educational organization that brings together concerned citizens, numerous community organizations, educators, and diverse professionals committed to work to preserve and rehabilitate natural resources of Westchester County. I'm here tonight to voice our concerns about the air permits for the expansions of Southeast and Stony Point compressor stations as part of Spectra Energy's Algonquin incremental market project. There are serious environmental and health risks associated with granting these air permits and allowing this project to move forward. Compressor station expansions proposed for Stony Brook and Southeast will emit additional pollutants into our air and expose us all to many tons of highly toxic emissions per year. Our region already fails to meet attainment levels under the Clean Air Act, and additional emissions will only exacerbate this problem. Pollutants emitted by the proposed pipelines and compressor stations include methane, mononitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, and carbon dioxide, among others. Both carbon dioxide and methane are greenhouse gases and are contributing factors to climate change. Carbon dioxide is the primary greenhouse gas emitted through human activities and already accounts for 82% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. The projected carbon dioxide emissions from the Southeast Compressor Station are over 283,000 tons per year, when the EPA threshold is only 75,000 tons per year. Even worse, the projected emissions for Stony Point Compressor Station are almost 314,000 tons per year. As for methane, the IPCC says that methane is 86 times more potent greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide over a 20-year period. At this critical point, again, in the battle against climate change, we must take action to reduce the amounts of greenhouse gas emissions emitted into our atmosphere and not allow industries to surpass the threshold set by the EPA. Spectra is allowed to bypass these thresholds for these two compressor stations by buying credits from other areas where emissions are under the threshold. However, as stated before, this region is already non-attainment in air quality, and thus residents would be asked to bear an even larger burden when it comes to living with environmental hazards in the air they breathe. Given these factors, FCWC believes that DEC should reject Spectra Energy's application to expand the compressor stations at Southeast and Stony Point. Thank you.
Brad Ashford. Hello, I'm Brad Ashford. It's ASHFORD, and I represent Labor 754, and I also live in Rockland County. Excuse me, I'm a little bit tired right now. I just got done working a long shift, but I decided this was important to come here. Some of the guys in my local aren't fortunate enough, like me, to be working steadily for the past 2 years, and this project is a great opportunity to put a lot of guys to work that really need it, and to put the community to work and build money for each other. I think that this project is in capable hands with our union. I mean, we're trained extensively in gas. I've worked in it as other guys like Stenson before me. He's done it for 7 years, and I mean, we have to go through a lot of hoops just to be able to work on this stuff. So it's not like it's just a bunch of ragtag guys going to work and trying to put together a pipeline. We're held to the utmost standards, and we have to do everything by the book and then some. I mean, I currently work on the Tappan Zee Bridge, and if this job, like the pipelines, anything like that, it's going to be above and beyond anything you can ever imagine. And I mean, think of it from this perspective. We're the guys on the front lines. We're the ones building this pipeline. We're experiencing the most exposure to these gases. And a lot of these guys have been doing it their entire careers. If we're the ones that are ready and eager to go to this pipeline and build it, then you have to think, I mean, we live in the area too. If we're exposing ourselves to it on a daily basis, then it can't really be as bad as everyone's making it out to be. So I'm just here to ask the DEC to approve the permits and put our jobs to work, put the community to work together, and build a more sustainable power system. Thank you.
Susan Filgaris, Filgueras. I have a totally different take on the Algonquin pipeline than every single person in the room and the judges. I live about 600 feet north of the pipeline. And in the first 3 years of owning my home, it cost me $50,000 to fix the drainage problem from the pipeline. Okay? I've got to talk quick. I've got 3 minutes and I don't do anything in a hurry and I run over. A couple of points. Should the pipeline be built, I want you judges to hold Spectra to the highest possible construction standards. As I begged and pleaded with them to do something about the drainage on the pipeline, I was told, well, we're a right-of-way. We don't have any responsibility. I got 2 words, and happy birthday, they aren't. I expect you to make Spectra put drainage from the start of the project to the end of the project. They have a right to build their pipe. They don't have a right to rain all over my yard and then tell me I'm a right-of-way. 2, we need an independent entity for an air quality health assessment and risk study. That entity, you're using my time, Judge. Sorry. We need the independent study. That needs to be on a quarterly basis. It needs to be available to the public, and the data needs to be resubmitted in data we can read. Because you can show me all those figures, and I got to get somebody to translate it. I live next to the compressor station. I live next to the pipe. That 42-inch pipe is going to sit on my head when I go to bed. Here's the better part. We want to talk about segmentation. They're going to put a 42-inch pipe under the CSX rail line carrying bomb trains that's going to go in the Ramapo Fault, and then we're going to lay the Champlain Hudson Power Express 1,000 megawatt hot transmission line over top of it. Anybody got a match? You're going to blow us up. Hundreds of millions of gallons of back and crude go down that rail line. Spectra's going to go under it. And then we're going to take a Canadian line that gives you no jobs, gentlemen, takes away from us, devalues our property. We'll lay a hot transmission line on top of 3, possibly 4 high-pressure pipes in the Ramapo Fault in front of Indian Point, and CSX will just run the back and crude trains right over. And what happens when the freighter comes down the Hudson River carrying the same amount of crude? Thank you.
Anita Babcock.
I'm Anita Babcock, B-A-B-C-O-C-K. This is not the first time I've been to one of these meetings. And the reason I'm here, it's because I'm worried about my well. I am not on the right-of-way. I have spoken to the gentleman here that was representing the company, all right? And I asked him, who is responsible for my well? And he said, are you on our right-of-way? I said, no. He says, well, and then he turned around and talked to the other gentleman, and he's informed me, well, maybe we are. So he did take my name, okay, and I did get a letter back, all right? Now, my well is 308 feet. I'm on the Ramapo Fault. My house was built on the Ramapo Fault. Every one of the earthquakes we've had, I felt. What does that do for us when they start blasting to put a 42-inch pipe in a 24-inch hole? Now, no matter where you blast, when there's rock, it can hit any place or any vein. My mother lived across the street from me, which was about 2 football fields away. She was on just plain gravel, dirt. But I'm on the Ramapo Fault. So who's going to supply me with water? I mean, we're making our river into another Love Canal. There's everything going in there. And I went fishing one day and I picked up a boot, so I know people are throwing other things in too. So I thank you for your time. I hope you take the time to think about us people that have lived there all their lives, which I have. I was born here, and I've lived here all my life, and my family commercial fished the river for 3 generations. So I know the river, and the fish don't just stay in Haverstraw, they go up north like we used to do. Thank you.
We're going to take a 10-minute break right now. The first speaker of the second part of the session will be Jerry Ratnitzky. It looks like R-A-V-N-I-T-Z-K-Y.
My name is Jerry Radnitsky. I live in Putnam County. I've been in Westchester and Putnam County for the past 50 years. Others have spoken about Indian Point with its 40 years of highly radioactive spent fuel rods and being next to 2 seismic faults. If Indian Point were to experience an explosion, millions of people could face horrible health impacts or death. It would be worse than Fukushima, and the radiation from that is still being spewed into the air and into the water, and the radiation has already crossed the Pacific and has reached North America. We don't want to destroy our Earth. Such an explosion would irradiate not only Putnam, Westchester, and Rockland, but even New York City, because it's within the 50-mile limit that U.S. government says is dangerous. So that while the chances of such an explosion may be small, the consequences are catastrophic. How can this project be approved without a safety assessment and a health impact assessment? It would be completely insane. How can safety be assured when the budgets of the regulatory agencies are constantly being reduced and they don't have enough manpower? This gas is supposedly for people in New England. It's not for here. But in reality, much of this gas is going to be sent overseas, where the prices are higher and profits will be greater for Spectra and for the gas companies. The 3 projects that Spectra have planned are proposed consecutively in an attempt to avoid the segmentation. But they need to be considered as segmentation because it's all part of one project. When you have one pipeline a block away from where the next one starts, it's obvious that they're trying to avoid regulations, and that shouldn't be allowed. I've been a lifelong union member, and I think the union people here are concerned with jobs. I understand that. But there would be many more jobs if they put their efforts into renewable energy. There'd be many more jobs without putting people's lives at risk. The AIM project is not to make pipelines safer.
I'm afraid you're 3 minutes wrong. Nancy Vaughn.
Hi, my name is Nancy Van. V is in Victor, A-N-N. I'm a Peekskill resident, and I represent Reynolds Hills community as its president. And I'm submitting these comments on behalf of our attorney for Reynolds Hills, John Lewis Parker, who has previously served as the regional attorney for this DEC region. The FERC process has been marred by lack of information, both timely and publicly available, and this must not be repeated in New York. At this time, there are too many questions for a very meaningful public comment to DEC. The DEC must make the missing drafts permits publicly available and renotice this hearing. Nonetheless, substantive and significant concerns are already evident on this record. The DEC environmental justice policy requires addressing of issues in overload communities. How has DEC followed this policy in this situation? There are pipeline facilities that are not even named in the Clean Air Act permits. A new pigging station and an expansion to an M&R station in and near Peekskill, which are clearly in potential EJ areas. Clean Water Act draft permits have not been made available for the wetlands, stream crossings, or the water quality certificate. In the past, gas pipelines constructed in New York, specifically the Millennium Pipeline and the Algonquin Pipeline work here in Stony Point, have resulted in unnecessary environmental damage and significant penalties. How is the department addressing the record of compliance issues with this applicant? Freshwater wetlands draft permits have not been made available. The applicant has not fully discussed wetlands, such as those that have not been fully delineated and that will be impacted in the right-of-way in Reynolds Hills and in Blue Mountain Reservation Park. A Hudsonian analysis suggests that at least 2 of these wetlands may exceed the 12.4 acre DEC regulatory threshold. There's been no discussion about the vernal pools and biodiversity. Finally, Clean Water Act Section 401 requires that the water quality certification be issued before FERC issues a certificate of public necessity. Thus, the general permit for stormwater discharges should also be a condition of the water quality certification. The notice of intent for coverage under this permit should be a condition precedent to issuing the WQC. This is a long-standing practice of DEC Region 3.
Thank you, Ms. Green.
Thank you.
Did not know where it was or where to look for it, so we got a hold of the representative of Solar Al. We had an alarm come in. Did not know